welcome back to Rue's Life. So this is the requested question and answer. So if you want to get to know a bit more about me, what I do, why I do it and so on, get yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, put your feet up and I will do my very best to answer your questions. So massive thank you to all of you that hopped onto my Facebook page. I'll leave a link below if anybody's interested in visiting my page. But a massive thank you to all of you that took the time to pop some questions on there. And there's some really good ones, so thank you ever so much for those. So without further ado, I've got my cup of coffee. So let's dive into these questions. So the first one's from Tracy. Do you have any hobbies apart from farming? So first and foremost, I'm really lucky that the farm and the animals and the growing and the gardening and everything that comes with it is a massive hobby. It's something that I really enjoy, and I think that that's actually quite important because it never becomes a chore. So they're all things that I enjoy. But I know what you mean. So yes, other hobbies that I have, I love reading. I love to immerse myself in a good book. I love walking. I like to take the girls, the dogs for a walk, greyhounds. But I also, because they don't actually walk too far, Kaylee has 3 legs. For those of you that follow, you may have noticed. And she does well, but she can't go for miles. And Kay actually has a heart condition, so again she can't go too far, and they don't cope very well in the hot weather either. So if I want to go for a longer walk, then I leave the girls at home. I also enjoy climbing, which I got into through Chris. He loves his climbing. He climbs indoors and he also climbs outside. I'm actually terrified of heights, but through Chris I've really conquered that. I wouldn't say that I'm not scared of heights anymore, but I do enjoy going with him and doing some indoor climbing, and that's something we're looking forward to doing again. We haven't been for some time with the restrictions, but I'm looking forward to getting back and doing a little bit more of that. I also really love going to the theatre. It's something I've done my whole life. I used to go with my parents when I was young. In my teens and into my 20s, I always used to go to the theatre regularly with my mum. And I'm really lucky that Chris actually likes to go to the theatre as well, so it's something we do together. So the next question is from Erica, and Erica asks, as a gardener, where would you like to see yourself in 10 years? Having a bigger veg area, growing more of one type of veg, more fruit, or something else? And this is a really interesting but tricky question. It's the one they sometimes throw at you in an interview, isn't it? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And it's one I always find very difficult to answer, but I'm going to do my best for you, Erica. So as for bigger, it's something that I think the younger me would have aspired to, but the older me, I'll be 50 next year, for those of you that don't know, and I do suffer with some chronic health conditions, and I also work full-time. So the reality is, if I take on too much, I'm not going to be able to cope with it. So this year I've expanded. Initially, when we moved here, I did think I would just grow in the polytunnel. I've expanded into the 3 outside beds. This year I've added on bed 4 and I've started bed 5. But I think I will probably stop at that. Although I could fill the whole paddock, I don't think I'd be able to maintain that. So I don't think it's going to be bigger growing space. I think really I want to get, as a lot of us growers do, I just want to be better at growing the foods that we eat, being able to not just pick and eat them when they're in season, but also to get better at preserving so that we become more self-sufficient. So I think self-sufficiency, that's where I'd like to see myself 10 years from now. Next question is from Ali, and Ali says, and also Rebecca tagged onto this because she wanted to know as well, when do you know when to harvest your onions and garlic? So my onions, I generally grow the majority of them from sets. I usually put them in the autumn and overwinter them. This year I've actually done them from the spring, and in all honesty I just monitor them. So you can really see, because I don't shove them too far into the ground, you can really see the bulbs bulbing up, so you can see the size of onion that you're growing, so that gives an indicator. Obviously, if they're trying to bolt or flower, then I will initially just chop those scapes off, but if they keep trying, I might harvest them a little bit earlier. But if everything goes to plan and I put them in when I want to and they grow when I want them to, I'm usually harvesting them sort of mid to end of the summer, and then I will dry them in the polytunnel. If you watch my videos or you follow me on Facebook, you'll see that I use the slats of the wooden staging in the polytunnel to tuck them down and dry them before I plat them, and then we store them in the spare bedroom in the house on their plats. But as for the harvesting, generally speaking, if the leaves are starting to go a bit yellow and flop over, and I can see that the bulbs are the size that they should be, and they haven't tried to bolt, then that's when I'll get them in. But I'll get them in earlier if they are threatening to bolt. And I generally put my garlic in at the same time that I put my onions in. So when I harvest my onions, that's when I'll harvest my garlic. Onions I have great success with, and I really enjoy growing onions, and I've had some really good harvests. Garlic I'm not so successful with, and I've never really had a particularly good garlic harvest. So if any of you growers have got any hints and tips on how you grow your garlic and get a successful harvest, I've only ever grown, it ends up either teeny tiny or as this year it's just not grown at all. I don't know what's happened to this year's garlic. So I would greatly appreciate any hints and tips. So moving on. So Tracy asks, tell us the most memorable call out you have experienced, and what is the most interesting animal you've treated. So I'm assuming you're talking about my job. So for those of you that don't know, I am an out of hours emergency and critical care veterinary nurse. Tracy, I think you think I'm a vet, but I'm actually a nurse, not a vet. And because I've chosen to specialise in emergency and critical care and out of hours, I actually work within a clinic that's open all night. So we work nights, weekend days, and bank holiday days. So essentially we're open when most daytime veterinary clinics are closed. We pick up all the out of hours work. So we don't do call outs per se. All our patients generally come to us. We do the very occasional house visit, but generally speaking, it's better if we can get the patients into us, because that's where we've got all our equipment, all the drugs that we might need. We've just got everything there. You know, we can't transport ultrasound equipment and x-ray equipment and blood testing machines to people's houses. So it's incredibly limiting on what we could actually do in a house visit. So generally we try to get the patients to come to us. So it's tricky because we see, because of the nature of my job being out of hours and emergencies, all our cases are generally really very interesting and exciting. So I think in terms of, let me just double check the question. Okay, so I think one of the most memorable cases that I've seen was a dog that had actually impaled itself. It was Christmas Day. The owners knew that they were going to be out all day, and they thought they would leave a door open into the garden so the dogs could go in and out. They had more than one dog, and they had taken the children. They'd gone off to see relatives for the day, and you know what it's like Christmas Day. Things often go on for longer than anticipated. So they came home much later than they anticipated, already feeling a bit guilty that the dogs had been left home alone all day, despite having left this door open for them to be able to pop in and out of the garden. And as they drove home, the owner, that was Mr., Mrs. and the children, they wanted to just get back, get the kids sorted and get them put to bed. And she noticed what she thought was a carrier bag hanging on her fence next to her gate, and she just thought, oh, maybe one of the neighbours has popped by and left us something, you know, for Christmas or whatever. Didn't think anything of it. Noticed the dogs were barking a lot, but again, they'd left them all day, so they weren't overly concerned at that point. Got the kids sorted and into bed, went to check on the dogs, who ran into the back utility room. One of the dogs was missing. She went out into the garden, and her beautiful little whippet had attempted to jump up and over what were spiky railings, and it wasn't a carrier bag at all. It was her beautiful whippet who'd managed to impale herself actually into her thigh and was hanging on the railings, and they've no idea how long she'd been there. So they actually lifted her off the railings, which is not something we would normally advise. We'd normally advise that the whatever is impaling a patient is cut, because sometimes the nature of taking it out can cause more trauma, but also more importantly, sometimes that's actually what's stemming the bleeding, and when you pull that out you can get major hemorrhage. So often we will say, don't take out the whatever it is that's in your animal, leave it in and let us deal with that, because we can have everything ready, including blood products for transfusion if we need to. And obviously we'd also get some pain relief on board, or usually anaesthetise before we do something like that. Anywho, it was Christmas Eve, it was crazy busy, we had a waiting room absolutely chock-a-blocker. They came rushing in. I took the original call. The lady was absolutely beside herself, understandably. As she came through the doors, we were ready to meet her with a trolley, and I genuinely thought that her little dog had died. She was shocky, she was cold, she was blue, she didn't appear to be breathing. We raced her straight through, and amazingly we managed to bring her back. The damage caused, amazingly, had missed all her any sort of vital organs or vessels, and once we got her stabilised for shock, we sutured her back up, we stitched up the holes. Obviously we checked her over, she had x-rays and so on to make sure there was no other damage, and she actually went home the following morning with the proviso that she would be treated at her own clinic for aftercare, but she was up on her feet, wagging her tail, and went home to her owners the next morning. And that really stuck in my mind, because it was Christmas Day evening. We had a waiting room full of people, but they were all so lovely. They were all obviously happy for this patient to go first because it needed to be seen. We're very much like A&E, but for animals, and we don't generally see people in order that they come through the doors. We triage, and then we have to, all our patients are important to us, but we do have to see them in order of, whether it's life-threatening or not. So broken bones, bleeding out, seizures and so on have got to come, or not being able to breathe. Anything that is immediately life-threatening has to go up the list, and then obviously something that's been lame on and off for a couple of days or just started vomiting but is still relatively bright, those sort of patients will be seen further down the list. But what was lovely was that everything that we admitted that night, when people rang for an update on their own pet, they all asked, how's the little whippet getting on? We can never give out too many details because of client confidentiality. But it was just a really lovely atmosphere that night, and it was great to save that little dog. The owners were absolutely made up. So that one really does stick in my mind. There are so many, but that one really does stick in my mind. And as for the most interesting pet, we once saw an iguana that had swallowed a staple. That was very interesting. We have sutured up a corn snake. That was interesting. And we once looked after a pet monkey overnight in one of the hospitals that I used to work in, and that was really interesting as well. So another one from Tracy. So did your parents grow vegetables, and if not, what or who got you into gardening and animals? And did you always want to live on a farm and become a vet from being a young girl? So short answer, yes. My mum used to grow vegetables, but it's not something I particularly remember. So I'm actually the youngest of three, and I know that when before I was born, and when my mum was first with my dad and they had their first home together, I know she had a little vegetable garden, and she used to grow things when my two elder sisters were sort of babies. And there's a bit of a gap between the two sisters, then a gap, then me. So I don't really remember my mum having that vegetable garden. I do, however, remember my mum's dad, so my granddad, having an amazing garden full of, he had an ornamental garden, but also he grew vegetables and fruit. So I remember that distinctly, and I can remember the smell, and it's still to this day, the smell of tomato vines. Whenever you touch them or handle them, that beautiful smell, and that will always remind me of my granddad's garden. So obviously my mum got her growing from her dad, and I've obviously got it from my mum. And also, yes, I've always wanted to live a country life. I've always wanted to work with animals, to live out with nature and also my own animals. I've worked on farms, so to have my own small holding was always an ambition of mine. I have been on other small holdings and I've always lived out in the countryside, but Chris and I came here 4 and a bit years ago now, and this is absolutely heaven. This is my little piece of paradise, and this is everything I've always wanted. 10 acres of land, enough room for the horses. We've got the sheep, the chickens. I can grow things. We've got our beautiful greyhounds. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. Love it here, and it's been something I've always wanted. And I've worked really hard to be able to have it. And as for the vet question, veterinary nurse I am. I've always worked with animals, and although I didn't specifically as a child think, I mean, as a very young child, I actually wanted to work in a post office. I used to make a little post office counter and stamps and envelopes, and I had a little thing to stamp them, and I used to spend hours pretending to have a post office, and I used to make my sisters and my mum and my dad come and post letters for me to, you know, sort. So that's what I wanted to do, and who knows, when I'm older, maybe I will work in or run a post office. But I left school and I worked with horses. I've also worked in boarding kennels and catteries. I worked for a period of time backing and schooling horses. I actually left school with only 4 GCSEs and was told I would never really make much of myself. Both my sisters were very intelligent straight A students, and I wasn't just your typical academic. I had to work really hard to pass exams, and I really lacked confidence. So when I left school, I did what I really wanted to do. I was told I needed 4 GCSEs to go and do a YTS scheme. So those of you that are as old as me might remember the old youth training scheme, which was essentially like an apprenticeship. And I went to work with horses in a lovely riding school on Anglesey, where I got paid £29.50 a week for the first year, and I think it went up to about £35 a week for the second year. But you also got your training and you got to go to college 1 day a week. I worked as a riding instructor for a number of years, and then I worked on different yards with horses and also farming. I then worked in boarding kennels and catteries, and then I started working in a veterinary clinic as a Saturday girl, essentially, you know, cleaning kennels, cleaning floors, stacking shelves, doing that kind of thing. And I just took more and more hours on, and as soon as I got the opportunity to take full-time work there, I did. And as soon as I got the opportunity to do my training to become a qualified registered veterinary nurse, I did that. So it's been a natural progression, I would say. So another one here from Tracy. Do you breed sheep for their meat or wool? So we have the 5 Wiltshire Horn ewes, which I bought from my sister. They're pedigree Wiltshire Horns. And we did originally buy them so that we could breed, and we would have bred for meat. Because for us it's really important to know that any meat that we eat, and I know this is a controversial subject, so apologies to anybody who's vegan or vegetarian, but the question's been asked, and this is how it is. We eat meat that we know where it's come from. So we don't eat a lot of meat. We only have maybe 2 sort of portions of meat and 1 of fish a week, and we ensure that it's high welfare, it's free range, it's been properly looked after, and not just from stampaging on stamps on packaging. We do our research. You know, my sister produces beef, and has in the past produced lamb, so I know exactly where they were born, how they've been reared, and very short distance for them to go and be slaughtered and processed. So the original plan was that we would actually breed for meat, and then we had various things happening in our lives, and we didn't get round to getting a ram. And then we had Larry, who those of you that follow me will have seen Larry the lamb and how he came to us and what a cutesy little pie he was, and how he grew up into a big gorgeous ram with curly horns. And we were going to use him as our ram when he was old enough, but very, very sadly, we lost him quite suddenly. He had a very sudden illness, as sheep are prone to. It absolutely broke our hearts losing him. And we've had the ewes now for nearly 4 years, and they're very fat, and we're probably not going to, well, we won't be breeding from these. We may consider having some different breeding ewes, but at the moment we're happy to just have them on the farm as pets. They are really good at chomping down any grass that hasn't been eaten, and sheep are great for putting on land after horses. So you do have to be careful with any livestock that you don't get a worm burden. So obviously we do treat them regularly, but sheep are really good at hoovering up any worms that may be left on the pasture, because the worms that live in horses can't live in the sheep. So if the sheep hoover up any of those eggs, or any of the, that have gone onto the grass from the droppings of the horses, if they get into the system of the sheep, it'll kill them because they can't live there. So, and also sheep are really good at grazing land flat, whereas horses tend to trample over what they think they don't like to get to something they think is better, and they're quite wasteful. So whenever you move horses off land, you'll see there's lots of little tufty bits. You can put the sheep on and they'll mow it nice and flat, which then means it comes back better ready for the horses. So I hope that answers your question. They have just turned into pets. Another one from Tracy here, which is, why don't you have any cats on the farm? I love cats, and I had cats my whole life until we started taking on retired greyhounds. So again, if you follow me, you'll see that we've got two beautiful greyhounds. They are both hounds that initially, before they came to us, were racing greyhounds. They are beautiful, big, soft-natured, fabulous dogs. They're such a lovely dog to own. They're lazy lummoxes. They enjoy a walk, but what they enjoy more is lounging about, either on their beds or on the sofa. And they're really lovely, easy dogs to have. People think they need a huge amount of exercise, but actually, they're sprinters, so it's that short, sharp burst and then stop. They don't actually have a huge amount of stamina for longer walks. You can build them up to that, but naturally they are sprint and stop animals. They are not designed to go and go and go and go. So, going back to the cat question, because both our hounds have raced, essentially they've been trained in their mind, if something is small and furry, you chase it and you catch it and you kill it. And I'm under no illusion, I've seen their reaction. If we have them off the farm and they're somewhere where we don't know if there might be a cat, or if we take them to a friend's house and we know they've got cats, or even, they do seem to know the difference between little dogs and cats, but even so, I have to be careful. If there was a little dog that came and ran at them, I couldn't be 100% certain that they wouldn't, have a pop at it. So they do wear their big Baskerville cage muzzles when they're out and about, but we just couldn't have a cat here because they would catch, and sadly they would kill. There is a little cat that roams around the place, but we discourage him, because I'd been mortified if I actively encouraged him to come onto the land and he got into the garden. They go after squirrels, they go after rabbits. There was an older cat that came onto the land not long after we'd first moved here, and he got out by the skin of his teeth. He didn't come back again, but they did chase him. And that's the other reason that we don't completely, well, two reasons we don't free range the chickens all over the farm. One is because we'd have to be careful with foxes and badgers, but also I can't let them near the hounds. So that's why we don't have cats. So I think I'll stop here. We're about the midway marker because I don't want this video to be too long. So we'll call that end of part 1, and look out for part 2 coming very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you all again soon.